We have big news tonight in our Block the Vote report. It turns out voter fraud does exist, even today in America. But it's the Republicans playing the dirty tricks. Today, Paul Schureck, the aide to Maryland's former Republican Governor Robert Ehrlich, was found guilty of conspiring to suppress black voter turnout in 2010. Prosecutors charged that Schureck approved deceptive calls to convince black voters not to go to the polls.
Paul, can we ask your reaction first?
He's not speaking.
Paul Schureck had no public comment after the jury's verdict, guilty on all 4 criminal counts.
I'm calling to let everyone know that Governor O'Malley and President Obama have been successful.
Related to the 2010 Election Day robocall that suggested Martin O'Malley had won the governor's race before the polls had actually closed. Schureck was the campaign manager for the Bob Ehrlich campaign. He authorized the call, which was missing the so-called authority line to hide the Ehrlich campaign's involvement.
Very gratified by the verdict.
Schureck testified the call was a counterintuitive attempt to get Ehrlich voters to the polls.
I thought it was ridiculous. I think it was ridiculous. I just don't buy it, and evidently the jury didn't buy it as well.
Notes taken by the woman who recorded the robocall says it all. Quote, suppress turnout in black communities. Amazing. The conviction highlights what countless minority voters report in every election, that Republicans use dirty tricks to suppress the vote. Joining me now is Judith Browne, Dianis, co-director of the Advancement Project, a civil rights group focused on the issues of democracy and race, and Will Crossley is director of voter protection for the Democratic National Committee. Thank you both for being here tonight.
Thank you, Rev.
Well, a stunning example of voter suppression today. So the plan to tell black voters that their candidate was doing fine so they wouldn't feel their vote was needed. Is that what the scheme was?
Absolutely, Rev. We began to get calls on this subject on Election Day when it was happening in the 2010 election, and we have followed it ever since, and pleased to see that a jury found nothing short of a conspiracy to commit election fraud by Republican operatives in the state of Maryland. They went after 110,000 African-American voters in the cities of Baltimore and in Prince George's County, Maryland. This is, in fact, the real fraud that's being perpetrated upon the American people, upon voters, by the Republican Party. And so this verdict today is evidence that that is going on.
Now, Judith, I remember 2010, we have a chapter National Action Network there, we were hearing this, but you hear it all over the country. Does this verdict, in your opinion, help with many of the cases that groups all over the country have been trying to fight? And will it put a little cold water on those operatives that may have plans for 2012?
Well, Reverend Sharpton, oops, they got caught.
Right.
This is clearly all of the stories that we have known that have existed for years, the deceptive practices. It's just a continuation of a campaign of misinformation that is being put together by the right wing. Instead of, talking about ID and trying to challenge the eligibility of hardworking Americans who want to participate in democracy, they are committing the real fraud against Americans by telling them to go to the polls on particular days after an election, or telling them that, in fact, you can't vote if you have parking tickets or you have some other issue. Instead of trying to block the vote, why not have real democracy and stop trying to undermine it? Next week, Reverend, we're going to be delivering a petition to the Department of Justice, calling on them to step up their efforts to stop voter suppression. We have over 120,000 signatures. We hope more people will join this effort, because we have to call on them to enforce the Voting Rights Act.
Well, there's no doubt about it, and there are 14 states. I just put the map up that saw 25 vote redistricting laws passed this year. We're rallying in 25 cities this Friday. There's a march this Saturday. There's your petition drive. Will, let me ask you, in Maryland, the doctrine there was, and I'm reading what they had actually written out, was promote confusion, emotionalism, and frustration among African-American Democrats, focus in precinct where high concentration of African-American votes. That was Maryland. Do you know of other schemes around the country, Will?
Oh, there's no question. We saw other efforts in 2010, these robocalls. We've seen the misinformation campaigns. We've also seen voter caging, a process in which they send out postcards to people, and if you don't return the postcard, then they question your residency and add you to a list. When you show up at the polls, question whether or not you're actually qualified to vote. That happened in 1982 in New Jersey. We've seen it in Louisiana, 1987. We've seen it 1990 in North Carolina. We prosecuted 2004 in Ohio, as well as in 2008 in the state of Michigan. They created these lists from people's names who had been placed on foreclosure and challenged their residency. We went to court over that as well. And so the important thing we want voters to know is that we were watching in the past this verdict today, and we'll continue to watch in the future for these kinds of activities.
Well, Judith, I think that this has got to be a fight, as you say, to preserve democracy and make things work that assure democracy for everyone. I wonder why, with all of these voter ID laws and all of this so-called fight against voter fraud, they're not talking about this in the right way. Strange they missed all of this voter suppression efforts that Will just outlined, and a jury convicted on today in Maryland.
That's right. This is the real fraud. Let's talk about this. Let's get some laws passed that stop these deceptive practices, that stop people from going to the polls, that give them misinformation. You know, unfortunately, this campaign of misinformation works for the right wing. And what we need to do is stand up, stand for democracy, and fight back and get some laws passed that convict more people like the one convicted in Maryland.
Well, there was only 86 prosecutions with the voter fraud they raised out of 3 million people voting. 300 million. I said 3 million, 300 million I meant voting. But here on the other side, where we're seeing convictions, they're not interested. That's why we are. Judith, Will,
thank you
both for your time tonight.
Thank you.